Let's discuss this further with education researcher and policy analyst Sara Black. Dr. Black, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us here on ENC. I mean, being a 2020 matriculant has not really been an easy time for you, and now we've got these two leaked matric exam papers, one in science, one in maths, and Sadtu, the trade union of teachers, taking government to court today. So there's still a little bit of apprehension in the air. What would be the best way to deal with this?
Good morning, Dan, and good morning to your viewers. I think that Sadtu's raising some very important points, not only about the psychological effects of rewriting on students, but on whether the rewrite is actually necessary given the extraordinary year that we've had and the measures we would expect higher education institutions to take to support next year's incoming first years. I think what needs to be done relates to what was said during the COVID debate about school shutdowns earlier in the year. We needed to have a strong conversation about how this year was going to be unusual, how higher ed was going to respond to a matric cohort who'd been through something deeply unusual, and to have that conversation in such a way that could both preserve the legitimacy of the process and with compassion. I think it's really important to think about what the students have already been through and what kinds of support and care they're going to need in order to enter any kind of further studies with any kind of integrity, but also in a way that means that they're going to cope.
But how do you balance that with what the department seeks to be doing, from what I've seen and heard, balance what you've just said with the integrity of the 2020 matric exams?
Well, that's a great question, Dan. I think that this leak has thrown open all sorts of issues that were already in the system regarding legitimacy of NSC exams. It's not a surprise to anybody who thinks about the problem that the higher you make the stakes and the harder you make it to succeed, the more you encourage illegitimate graft. I mean, this is something that casinos and anybody else who's ever had high stakes and low success rates knows. So I think it was almost predictable, given COVID, given how much rests on a single exam, that people were going to be strongly incentivized to graft. Rather, we should be asking questions, in my opinion, about why we make so much hang on one single exam. And as you said, the Department of Basic Education's activities have illustrated that rather than questioning that system, they're doubling down on it, which I think is a very reactive approach, rather than saying perhaps the system is brittle and prone to breaking very easily, and we need to rethink about it.
Would it then be a sensible thing not to rewrite these two leaked exam papers, and just considering what you've just said, even if we have to talk about the integrity of the papers? I mean, Sadtu now is taking the Department of Education to court, so the courts are going to have to make a decision.
Well, I would ask whether the papers, even unleaked, would be legitimate, given what the students have been through this year.
Would you also ask how far widespread the leak reached?
Yes, I think that is a valid point, although it would seem from most reports that I've read that the leak, particularly with the papers to be rewritten, it's interesting to ask why the business studies is not being rewritten. We could have a whole conversation about that. But it seems that it only happened a few hours before the paper was due to be written. And just to think about what it would take for a student to actually make use of that leaked paper in any meaningful way, you would have to memorize the whole paper, all the answers, and regurgitate that in exam conditions anyway. So ask about the probability of that being done successfully. And I know this is a controversial thing to say, how different that is from what students do normally anyway. From past paper to past paper, the amount of change is not enormous. There's a lot of memorization involved in our matric exams. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. So really, is there actually that huge a loss of integrity for a couple of hours if the students saw the paper beforehand? I think that that's an important question to ask. I don't have the answers, but I suspect that what we would find is not as black and white as we might initially assume.
Yeah, thank you very much for your views there, Sara Black. And really the essence is that maybe these two leaked papers should not be rewritten, judging by what matriculants have gone. Well,